The Swiss cheese plant, Monstera deliciosa, is one of the most iconic houseplants of all, with its incredible split and holy leaves. It comes from Central America, southern Mexico and Guatemala, and it grows in a wide variety of different settings in the wild, which makes it a really good houseplant to grow in your home. One of the reasons why Monstera deliciosa is such a good houseplant is how adaptable it is, so it'll grow in many rooms in your house. The more light you give it, the better growth you'll get, but just avoid giving it really strong afternoon sun and make any changes to its situation gradually so it can get used to more light. It isn't that bothered about humidity, so aside from not sticking it next to your open fire or radiator, it will cope in most rooms and it's not too worried about dry air. Swiss cheese plants ideally need repotting once a year or maybe even twice a year because they're quite hungry plants. They will fill the pot with their meaty roots quite quickly, so check the roots regularly, and once you're finding that the roots are circling the pot, get it repotted. A slightly larger pot is fine. You should just be able to get your finger between the old pot and the new one. And you can use regular houseplant compost. If you can, just add some fine orchid bark or some perlite just to aid drainage. So the other thing that people ask about are these aerial roots that come out of the stem, and in nature these are the things that anchor the plant to the trees that it grows up and also reach down into the ground to access extra water and nutrients. So if you can, direct them into the pot so they can go into the soil, or if that's not possible, you can cut them off at the base. Don't cut them off halfway along, otherwise they will just turn into a spaghetti monster. Swiss cheese plants are pretty forgiving when it comes to houseplant care, but there's a few things you can do to keep them looking good. And the first thing is keeping the leaves free of dust. You just need a damp cloth and give the leaf a gentle wipe down whenever you see dust accumulating. This helps the plant to photosynthesize and also makes the leaf look so much better. You don't need to put anything on it, just a damp cloth will do the trick. And this is a good chance to just examine the health of the plant and also to check whether it needs watering. Now, it's best to let the soil dry out a little bit between waterings, especially in winter. Don't go by what the surface of the soil feels like. You want to know what's going on at root level, and there's a number of different ways to do that. You can buy a plant moisture meter like this and put that in the soil down to a good depth, and if the soil's dry you can water. If you want to go low tech, a wooden kebab stick is perfect, or chopstick. Just stick it in the soil, leave it for about half an hour, pull it out, and if it's moist your plant probably doesn't need watering. When you do water, don't just dribble a bit of water on the top. Give the plant a really good soak so that the whole of the pot, all of the root ball gets damp. Drain off and then replace it, and wait until the soil goes dry again before you water again. That way you won't have any problems with root rot. If your Swiss cheese plant is a little bit floppy like this one, there's probably two things happening. First, it could probably do with a tiny bit more light. If you can move it slightly closer to the window, you'll find that you get more compact growth. The second thing you can do though is to support your plant. The Swiss cheese plant in nature grows by climbing through tree canopies, supporting itself using these aerial roots and reaching up into the light. In order to emulate that at home, we haven't got a tree trunk for it, but we can give it a range of supports. It could be anything from an obelisk like this or a piece of trellis. You could also use a bamboo stake like this, pretty easy to get hold of from the garden centre, or if it's a bigger plant you might need a plastic pipe like this one or a metal stake just to give that extra support. Whatever you use, you're going to need to attach the plant to that state. If you choose a moss pole, it may be that the aerial roots of the plant over time will grow into the moss pole and support itself, but you're going to need to initially tie it in. You can use twine, you can use any kind of plant support. I've got this Velcro plant tape, which is really useful because it's soft, it won't damage the plant, and you can cut it to suit the needs of the plant and the thickness of the stem. And this can just be attached around the stem. Keep an eye on this so that it doesn't get too tight for the plant. As it grows, you might need to readjust it, but it will just help the plant to be supported. Then once you've got it in its setting, you might need to move it around a bit to make sure that you're seeing its best side, but bear in mind that the leaves do move towards the light, so giving your plant an occasional half turn will help it to grow evenly. One of the main issues I hear people tell me about with Swiss cheese plants is, what do I do now? It's reached the ceiling. The great thing about Swiss cheese plants is they are eminently hackable. So it's very easy to reduce the size of your plant or reshape it to suit your needs by taking cuttings. So this plant has a couple of stems in here, and one of these stems was chopped about 5 months ago, and you can see the place where it was cut, and here is the side shoot which is starting to sprout and come again, so this will fill out from this point. And if I wanted to cut another stem on this plant, I need to look for these nodes, the point where the leaf stalk joins the stem. And here's a node, the bit in between, the internodal space is where we want to be chopping. So I would chop just above this node, and then once the cutting's taken off, I would trim to just below this node. Because this is where the roots are going to come out of. We can already see an aerial root coming out. That would make the perfect cutting. And once you've got the cutting, you can place it in water. And here's the cutting that I took off 5 months ago. It's really ready to go into a pot now. As you can see, it's got a fantastic root system that's formed. And this can be potted up as a separate plant, or if I wanted to, I could put this into a slightly larger pot, make a bushier plant by adding this into the pot. They're sturdy plants, but things can go wrong with your Swiss cheese plant. One of the most common problems is yellowing leaves, and it's important to check which leaves are causing the problem. In the case of this plant, this leaf is starting to yellow, but if we look at the stem, we can see it's the lowest leaf, which means it's the oldest leaf. So it's totally natural for a leaf that is the oldest to occasionally die off. So in this case, we can just wait until it's gone completely yellow and then snip it off at the base. If, however, you're finding that the leaves all over the plant are going yellow, usually that's a sign of something going wrong at root level. So it's worth checking the roots, making sure they're not rotting, making sure they're not super dry, address those problems, and hopefully your plant will become green again. You might also want to look for pests though. This plant, like most houseplants, can be attacked by a range of pests, and oftentimes the places that they'll dwell will be the places that you look least. So things like the backs of the leaves and crevices along the stem. So wiping your leaves regularly is a really good way of dealing with these problems, but you'll be wiping the backs of the leaves probably to deal with spider mites, for example, or thrips. You can use a horticultural soap spray, spray that on and then wipe away. And repeating this is a good way of dealing with pest infestations. One other thing you can do, if you have a pest called scale, which are little brown scales that you'll find along the stem, along the midrib of the plant, and actually this works for other pests too, like aphids, you can just take a piece of parcel tape, paper parcel tape, and just gently apply it to the plant. Because this is a really tough, leathery plant, it's not going to be damaged. So you can just gently apply it to any places where you might see some pests, and this will pick them up, and then you can just dispose of this, and it helps to cut down on pest populations. For many decades, the plain green species of the Swiss cheese plant ruled supreme, but in recent years, some other variegated cultivars have become available. There's Albo Borsigiana, which has got white marks on the leaves, and my personal favourite, Thai Constellation, which has got cream splashed leaves, which look absolutely gorgeous. Until quite recently, this was a very expensive houseplant, but in the last couple of years, the price has really come down as the plant was mass propagated by nurseries, so now it's accessible to everybody. So it's just a question of choosing your aesthetic, which one you love and brings you joy, and then enjoying it in your home.